React to S3 behind a CloudFront CDN using GitHub Actions in less than. Let's do it. Step 1, you need to have an Amazon Web Service account. Step 2, once you're in the console, go to the services at the top left and type in S3. This is going to take you to the S3 bucket page. You're going to create a bucket here at the top left. It's going to ask you for a bucket name. This has to be unique across all buckets in AWS. I'm going to name mine YouTube Actions to S3. You click next once you figure your name out. You can skip all of this. Once you get to the set permissions page, you uncheck block all public access. And then you have to scroll to the top here and click the I acknowledge. This is basically telling you that your bucket's going to be public and people can read from it. Click next and then click create bucket. Once you have your S3 bucket created, head to the permissions tab and then head to bucket policy. I'll have a link to the GitHub gist for the bucket policy that we're going to use, but I'll go ahead and copy and paste this in, and I'm going to copy the ARN here right where it says bucket policy editor, and I'm going to paste it in here into the resource. This is basically saying we can read anything from this particular bucket at the root path and anything below it. Once you have this pasted in, click save. It should give you a success message and tell you that your bucket has public access. Then head over to the properties tab. Once you get to the properties tab, click static website hosting, and we're going to check use this bucket to host a website. We're going to paste in index.html for the index document and then same for the error document. This is basically telling S3 that whenever we go to this URL here, retrieve the index.html, which is going to boot up our React app. Once you're finished with this, click save and it should update the settings of our S3 bucket. Now that we have our S3 bucket set up for static hosting, we need to set up our CloudFront distribution. Head over to services at the top left and type in CloudFront. Head to the CloudFront page and then click create distribution at the top left. Go ahead and click get started here for web, and we'll quickly go through some of the settings that are crucial to this. For origin domain name, you're going to go ahead and select the S3 bucket that you just created. Once you have your S3 bucket selected, click yes to restrict bucket access and then create a new identity, and then click yes to update bucket policy. We don't need to mess with any other settings for this video, so scroll to the bottom once you're done with that and then click create distribution at the bottom right. Once that's created, redirect to the distributions page at the top left here and validate that your new CloudFront distribution is in progress and enabled. Now that we have our S3 bucket created and our CloudFront distribution created, we need to create an IAM role for our GitHub repo so that GitHub can go ahead and deploy this on our behalf. Head to the services at the top left and type in IAM. Once you're on the IAM page, go ahead and go to users at the top left and then click on add user. You can choose whatever name you want. I'm going to name mine CI admin. And below, we're going to click on the programmatic access type because we need an access key ID and a secret access key for our CI process. Once you have the name and access type configured, click on next to go to permissions and then click on the attach existing policies directly tab. Once you click on this tab, it'll give you a few options for some pre-built policies. Go ahead and click on the administrator access. This is basically going to give this IAM role admin access to do anything, so please beware of what you're doing with this. Once you have this selected, go ahead and just skip through all of this and go to review. And once you finish the review, you can click create user and it should give you a success. On the success page here, you'll see the access key ID and the secret access key. Hide these, don't give these to anyone. This basically gives anyone with CLI access the ability to assume this IAM role and do whatever they want in your AWS account. Copy the access key ID and the secret because we're going to need that in the next part of this video. Now that we have our cloud services configured, we just need a React app to actually deploy. To get our CI process running correctly, we need to create a new folder here in the root of our project directory called .github. Inside of that .github folder, we're going to create a workflows folder. Inside of workflows, create a dev.yaml file. I usually have a CI file for every environment, so I'll have one for dev, one for staging, and one for prod. I'm going to quickly code out this CI pipeline, and then I'll explain what I'm doing. quickly explain what I'm doing here. So I have this on here, which basically tells GitHub Actions to run whenever we push to our branch, but this branch specifically. So this is gonna run on the develop branch. The jobs here describes which jobs you're gonna be running during your CI pipeline. You can have a test job, you can have a lint job. In my case, I just have a build and deploy job. Inside of the build job, we have a runs on option, and this runs on Ubuntu latest. This basically tells GitHub Actions to run Ubuntu whenever all of this pipeline stuff actually does run during CI. The steps here describes what we want our CI job to do before it completes. So in our case, we're going to check out the repository. We're going to set up Node with version 12. We're going to configure AWS, the AWS CLI in this pipeline. After that's configured, we're going to install npm. We're going to run our build, our production React build. We're going to copy the files to S3. And then once those files are copied over to S3, we're going to run a CloudFront invalidation. You'll notice that some of these steps have uses and then some of them have run. The run syntax here basically lets you type in a custom shell script to run. And the uses syntax here in line 21 basically utilizes someone else's pre-built GitHub action. So in this case, we're letting that job configure the AWS credentials locally. And all we have to do is just pass in some parameters for that to work. Now that we have our CI pipeline built out, there's a few things that we have to switch out. On line 34, you'll have to switch out this for your S3 bucket, and you'll have to switch out the dist folder here if your React project spits out a different bundle folder. You'll also have to paste in your correct CloudFront distribution ID here on line 39. If you remember from earlier, I mentioned that we would need the AWS key ID and the secret key that was generated whenever we created our IAM role. This is where it's going to come into play here on line 23 and 24. We're going to take those variables and configure them in our GitHub repository settings. You can configure these variables by going to your GitHub repository, clicking on settings here at the top right, going to secrets and the tabs on the left, and then creating new secrets here. And the names of the secrets will correspond to what we have in our GitHub Actions file. So what's going to happen is whenever we push to our develop branch, it's going to run the CI job that we have here, and it's going to get to this AWS step. Once it gets to that step, it's going to pull the secrets from our GitHub repository, and then this job is going to set up the AWS CLI in that pipeline runner. And then whenever it gets to the AWS sync step, it's going to use the key and the secret from your IAM profile that we set up earlier, and it's going to use those credentials to get access to sync those files and then create the invalidation for you. And that's all we need to do. So we can test this now by going to our terminal on the right and pushing to that develop branch. So assuming you already have that develop branch already checked out, we can do a git add and then commit our message. Just going to say init and then git push origin develop. Now that we have a successful deployment, we can validate that this actually worked by going back to the S3 services tab in AWS, going to your S3 bucket, and then clicking into it and seeing that there are some files in there. To test that the CDN is working properly, head back to the CloudFront distributions and find the domain name here of your CloudFront distribution. Open a new tab, paste in the domain name, and do /index.html, and it should load up your React app. If you don't want to have to type index.html to access that root level object every single time you go to your CloudFront domain, you can go back to your CloudFront domain options and then click on edit in the general tab, and then scroll down to the default root object and type in index.html and then click save to edit it. This is basically going to make it to where whenever you go to your CloudFront domain, it's going to access index.html by default for you. When it comes to deploying a React app to S3 and CloudFront, this is the gist of what you need to know. There's some security related stuff that I'm not going to put in this video. That'll probably be another video down the line. The next step after this would be to set up Route 53 for a custom domain and then tie the Route 53 record to your CloudFront domain so you don't have this ugly CloudFront URL. Hopefully this stuff was useful. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comment section below and I'll try to answer them. Otherwise, thank you for watching the video.